This is part 2 of our interview with Dr. Edwin Vieira. Please see part 1 if you want to get the first half of this interview. So here we're faced with this peak, at least it's a palpable and perceptible increase in the civil unrest and a increase in the level of concern of people who are paying attention. Some people would say it's too late, this deconstruction has gone too far, we can't reclaim it. What's the message to people who are paying attention or are concerned and do want to do something about it, first of all in their own lives and second of all in their communities in our country?
Well, I think first in your own life is you have to make some kind of commitment to do something. And for some people that's, well, I'm going to go out and buy a gun. I'm going to go out and get some training. I'm going to go out and be ready to and come back, I guess. I'm going to go out and do these things. I'm going to come back to my own home, and I'm going to be really ready, willing, and able to defend myself and my family if this kind of thing lands on my doorstep. So that's number one. There's some kind of commitment, at least at the familial, individual and familial level, to be willing to defend oneself and one's immediate family, one's immediate neighbors. And the next step is, well, you go out to your own community. Well, we have these structures, so my term is we want to revitalize them. They're there. They're kind of on life support. And we want to revitalize them, and that requires educating a lot of people and explaining to people why we're in this situation, and then causing them to do something. And what I would propose, I have been proposing, somebody long ago should have gone to Trump as President of the United States and filed some sort of petition with him saying, we're members of the militia of such a state where these things are going on. You're the President of the United States. You're the Commander-in-Chief. You have this statutory authority. We want you to do this, or at least say this. All right? So make this a political question at his level. It could be done as well at the gubernatorial level, assuming the governor isn't one of the neo-Bolsheviks, because the governors in every state are the local commanders-in-chief. All right? And so you could do the same thing with them. And you could go to them, because it's probably easier to get legislation passed in a particular state than it is in Congress, and demand some amendments of the local state laws dealing with the militia. Here in Virginia, we have a statutory structure that's kind of gobbledygook. They've changed a little here and a little there over the years, and nobody ever really sat down and said, does this all make sense? Is it all consistent? So a lot of it's really, you look at it and you say, my God, how is this supposed to work? So we can amend that. That wouldn't be that difficult to do. Probably take a good lawyer a week or 10 days to draft some appropriate revisions to amend that. And then go to the governor, go to the head of the Senate, the representatives in your state general assembly, and say, here's some legislation we want passed to correct this situation so that people will now be in a position to exercise this constitutional authority. And one of the things that I would do if I were writing that, I would bring all of these police units into the militia, so they'd all be subject to. So we end then this problem, which the BLM, the Black Lives Matter movement, supposedly is addressing itself to, which is rogue police action. We solve that problem. That goes away. Why? Because in those areas where the Black Lives Matter people say, well, black people are being oppressed, who's going to become the police units? From where are they going to draw the police units? Well, from those areas. People will be policing themselves. Obviously going to require some restructuring of the statutes, some restructuring especially of the way the police operate. But you solve that problem entirely. It goes away. So if those people were not neo-Marxists, if they were constitutionalists, this is what they'd be screaming for. All right? If I were a black leader in Baltimore or in Detroit or in Chicago, where they're having all of this violence among their own people, for heaven's sake, black people killing black people, this is what I'd be saying. I'd be going to Lori, whatever her name is there, the mayor of Chicago, or the mayor of Minneapolis, say, this is what we need. We're going to solve our local problems locally. by returning to a system in which our own communities are in control of these police functions.
Right.
And then you see how fast those politicians would run the opposite direction. Oh, they wouldn't want that at all, because the next step, of course, would be political control, which is what they don't want. As soon as people realize what their real authority is, then they start saying, wait a minute, I don't have to listen to some politician feeding me this bird seed. That's what they're desperately afraid of.
Uh-huh.
Okay, ultimately, because when you think of a free state is not simply one that can defend itself in a military sense or in a paramilitary sense or in a police sense. It's one that maintains the principles of freedom in the face of all sorts of political attempts to limit freedom.
Right.
Okay? And that's what the politicians are desperately afraid of. They don't want the people realizing that, because that's what their business is. Their business is limiting people's freedom in order to obtain brownie points or money or whatever it is from special interest groups. That's what they do. They sell themselves to special interest groups on the theory that you put me into office and I'll pass laws that advantage you at somebody else's expense.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I'll keep those other people confused as to what's going on, so they won't realize what's happening. And also they won't have the ability to get me out of office. That's how I can be reelected and reelected and reelected. No matter that the city that I'm supposedly in control of as the mayor is sinking deeper and deeper into a cesspool of depravity and whatever incompetence. How is it possible, you look at this and say, how is it possible that these cities have had these progressive politicians in control for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and no progress has ever been made?
Right. In fact, that's where you see the highest crime rates, the highest fatherlessness rates, the highest violence rates, on and on. The flight of those who are actually creating wealth in the economy are flying out of those areas and moving to safer areas. And unfortunately, in some places, transplanting that ideology with them.
Well, that's the grave difficulty, because they don't realize. If they realized what the problem was years ago, they could have stopped it from becoming as bad as it has become. They could have said in the 1950s, oh, we just fought this terrific war to defeat fascism and so forth. Well, we don't want those ideas in one guise or another to take hold in this country, and therefore we want the people to be in control, and therefore we want to say, I can go on the list of things that we would have done. They didn't do that. And so here we are. And so they're going to take that line, political line, which I think in many instances is a result of just ignorance, right? And as they flee New York, as they flee Chicago, they'll bring that level of ignorance. I give you an example. I used to go up to New Hampshire all the time. I haven't done it for a couple of years, to give a lecture there at an organization every September. And when I first started, New Hampshire really did abide by its slogan, live free or die.
Okay.
All right? New Hampshire was a real contrast to Massachusetts. But what happened was people were leaving Massachusetts and getting a residence in New Hampshire. They'd keep their jobs in Boston, and they'd commute.
Oh, yeah.
Down Route 3, I think it was. This is a commute. And so they go up to Nashua, and then it went up to Concord and whatever, up to these various cities. And slowly but surely, they brought their political ideas with them from Massachusetts. They left Massachusetts because they didn't like high taxes. They left Massachusetts because they didn't like certain kinds of regulations. And the next thing you knew, the people in the New Hampshire legislature from those areas where these transplants had settled were introducing Massachusetts legislation.
Right.
They never figured out that you don't get away from the bad aspects of Massachusetts legislation by bringing it with you.
Yeah, that problem is widespread. We speak with Joel Skousen of Strategic Relocation, and he talks about his recommended destinations for liberty-minded people wanting to relocate and either homestead or just live in a supportive community that has some sense of local sovereignty. He's having to keep reevaluating new versions of that book, and the target areas are decreasing. There's more and more of this mentality spreading that you're talking about.
Well, that's what I tell my wife all the time, and say we have to start thinking about going to the Solomon Islands, right? Guadalcanal or someplace like that. That's where could you be that this thing is not going to infiltrate and fairly quickly? So, I mean, even the United States.
Yeah.
Right. When I came here to Front Royal, Virginia is way out. We're just about as far as west as you can get before you're into West Virginia, in terms of having a town. And Virginia was still a very conservative place. And now, and this was like 11 years ago when I finally moved out here, and now the eastern half of Virginia is indistinguishable from Maryland or New Jersey. It's as left-wing as you can imagine. And the western half of Virginia is completely different. But the western half of Virginia is not as well populated, and so as a matter of, raw votes, legislators that they can elect.
Right.
The eastern part of Virginia, there are a couple of towns. We've got a town, Roanoke is in western Virginia, but Danville. But otherwise, the Virginia legislature is now dominated by these urban bedroom communities of Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
And, okay, there it is, the same kind of so-called progressivism. And as those people move out of those areas, they bring it with them. They don't like the regulations, they don't like the taxes and so forth coming out of Fairfax, Alexandria, Arlington, what have you, and they bring it with them. And so that's what we're seeing here, in even as far out as Front Royal. It's like bacteria expanding to the edge of the petri dish.
Yeah, we have family members moving. They're fleeing Los Angeles, greater Los Angeles area for Arizona, and they were told by their realty people that they were consulting with that there's 90,000 people per year leaving LA County and heading to Arizona. We've talked to very well-intended supporters of ours up in Montana and Idaho, and in describing potential locations we might want to relocate to in those states, said, but you've totally got to stay away from this city, this city, this city, because they have become just basically copies of Portland or copies of San Francisco. They've been lost to people who want to uphold constitutional values.
Yeah, it usually starts in the university towns. Bozeman, I guess, is one of them, right? I remember years ago, and this was years ago, this was the 1960s, I was out in Colorado with a friend of mine, and it was not Denver, but Boulder. Boulder was an extreme progressive enclave in Colorado, and it was notorious. And so I was talking to some of the people out there, and I said, don't you worry about this? I said, oh, no, outside of those few, university people in Colorado are really sensible, and they don't buy any of that stuff. That's just a little enclave that will never spread, like a mole.
Right.
Never spread. Well, it turned out to be melanoma. Right. It wasn't as they used to call them beauty spots. It was just a little mole. Melanoma. Right. It spread across the entire bloody state, unless you're in some really rural area now. And that's the difficulty, because those people generally tend to be interested in political activism of one kind or another. And they will, in fact, insinuate their ideas into the legislature. And then once that happens, because of the, the tendency of people to vote in incumbents, it's amazing how people can be talking about how they hate Congress, and yet they keep voting in the same incumbent they've had for the past 20 years.
Yes.
All right? So you have those two things working together, and then the irresponsibility in the sense of the people in political office. They can do whatever the heck they want, and the only fear that they have is perhaps they'll be voted out of office, but then they'll get a board of directors position in some big corporation. They'll be happy, or foundation, or whatever. There's always a golden parachute operation. And all those things work together. And the difficulty is coming back to the militia concept, the average person here is not organized in anything that actually has governmental authority behind it.
Right.
You can be a member of the Republican Party, so what? That's a private organization. You can be a member of the Democratic Party, it's a private organization. You can be a member of Antifa, That's a terrorist organization, but still private, all right? Has no governmental authority. The militia has governmental authority. That's why it's there in the Constitution. That's why it's there in all these statutes. And people don't seem to realize that if you're not in a position of governmental authority so that you can make certain public decisions, then someone else is going to make all those decisions for you. And you'll have no recourse, even the recourse of deterrence. Because presumably, someone in a legislature can pass some statute. Even if you're in the militia, you may not like this statute. But if you have a militia structure and enough people in the militia properly organized look askance at that kind of legislation, that legislation probably won't even be enacted. But if it is, it will be repealed at the next session of the legislature. Well, people don't have that now, so they're stuck going to, it's like the Tea Party. You had to recreate entirely some organization.
Yeah.
And then what happens? Well, of course, Trump comes in and the Tea Party dissolves. We got Trump, we don't have to worry about that. And there's nothing left of it. The beauty of the militia structure is it's always there. And when people come into it, and that would be, talk about 16 years old when you're actually a member, but as a practical matter, this is something that would have to be taught in the schools from the time you were 13, 14, 15 years of age, because you have to prepare people for this. When you're 16 years of age, Bill, you're going to be going to this organization, you're going to be subject to this kind of, you're going to do this, whatever it is. Why are we doing that? Well, when you're 13 years of age, that's when we start, maybe 12. Here's why we're doing it. We have a constitutional structure. It's called the Republican form of government. It depends upon the sovereignty of the people, blah, 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 what we've been talking about. And they're getting that for 3 or 4 years before they actually enroll in the militia. They understand what this is all about. They understand what their duty is. They understand what their power is. Now, if you did all of that, by the time kid's 16, 17 years old, you think that he would fall for the nonsense of some university professor trying to teach him neo-Marxism?
No, he should have been strengthened and formed in proper understanding of his role in civil society by that time.
Yeah, absolutely. The first time that professor in Yale or Harvard started talking neo-Marxism to him in the economics class, the whole class would have laughed at him. So this is nonsense, Professor Jones. Get to the point. Don't give us that crap. And there's our difficulty. That's the same thing with politicians. Right? You have some politician that begins trying to sell a line contrary to the basic principles of a constitutional republic, and the average voter, having been trained from 16 to when he can vote, 21, so you're talking about 5 years, right? Having been trained properly, is he going to listen to that politician? I would think not. One would hope not. Right? So it would be a complete, I hate to use the word this way, complete revolution in the way we're operating today. It would put the most important elements of the social control, especially at the local level, we're talking about the police, so-called police forces, in the hands of the people themselves. It would make the average politician entirely beholden to these people and not able to double-talk them or threaten them in any way. This would include prosecutors and judges as well. Society would be completely different from what it is. And we certainly wouldn't have this. We certainly wouldn't have the problems of Portland.
Yes.
We wouldn't. It's close to 80 days now, 70-something days of rioting, and nobody seems to want. Not talking about be able. Nobody seems to want to do anything about it. What is? Look at the Constitution of the United States in the preamble. Right? Preamble sets out the ultimate goals in the positive sense, in the same way that the Bill of Rights sets up ultimate limitations in the negative sense. They kind of work together that way. And the preamble, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense. Just take those. Establish justice. Are they establishing justice by letting the rioters run amok?
No.
They're certainly not ensuring domestic tranquility.
No.
They're certainly not providing for the common defense of certainly the people whose businesses are being looted.
Right.
General welfare, securing the blessings of liberty. I don't think you have the blessings of liberty when you can't keep your shop open because someone is threatening to burn it down. Right? So leave the more perfect union aside, because that was the question of making sure that all the states would work in harmony. But all the other provisions of the preamble to the Constitution are being violated right now on the streets of Portland. Well, maybe not right now, tonight, on the streets of Portland. And the political class, which is put in order to perform these functions, serve those purposes, is doing what? Nothing. Or applauding these people.
Worse than nothing, undermining, that's right.
Well, they're undermining everything else. And you had Kamala Harris gave was it her acceptance speech after she was proposed by Biden, accepted by Biden, and she said, well, what's going on in the streets? Is this a new consciousness we're seeing? Like a new standard of social behavior, political behavior, rioting. When we don't get what we want, we riot. That's what's going on. Oh, that gets you to the more perfect union. Now you're going to have states in which rioting is allowed and other states in which it isn't.
That's right.
So maybe, I guess, every provision of the preamble is being violated if you look at it from that perspective.
Yes, right. Yeah.
And the one person in the entire country who actually has the constitutional authority and statutory authority to do something about it today is being told by all of these people, we don't want you involved. If you weren't to be involved, you'd be some kind of fascist. When they are taking actions for which the Congress in 1871 passed a specific statute dealing with the Ku Klux Klan. I've always wondered why I mean, if I were Trump, this is what I would say. I have a national broadcast like Roosevelt.
Yes.
Had the fireside chats on radio.
Yeah,
I do it on the internet. I do it on TV. Right.
Right.
Look, here's what's happening. Right. You got these people there, these governors and mayors, and they are refusing to exercise the authority they actually have to suppress rioting, looting, arson, assault, murder, whatever. This whole list of felonies. And how is this? And they're doing this in the name of black people. How is this different from the Ku Klux Klan, which did it to black people? And they're doing it to black people in these riots as well. And a lot of these stores that are being burned down and so forth are owned by black people. How is this different? These are the Ku Klux. This is neo-Confederacy that we see here. They use the term that they don't like, right? This is neo-Confederacy. This is the new form of the KKK. The Night Riders. And I have a statute specifically passed by the Reconstruction Congress, 1871, to deal with the KKK. And I'm going to apply that statute to deal with this resurrection of the KKK. Now, I'm sure that Rachel Maddow and the people, MSNBC and CNN, I mean, they go ballistic.
They would.
But historically, it would be correct.
Yeah.
And actually, in terms of what's going on,
the
it would be correct.
analogy is sound, right?
The analogy is very good. So I'm just surprised why he hasn't done something about it other than, politics of, let them stew in their own juice. And somehow that will benefit him, electorally. Yeah,
there's a lot of ordinary people, many of whom are our subscribers, that are being impacted either directly by this, or we're even going to be doing a visit to Miles Franklin's vault next week, and we have to plan our route to avoid certain urban areas that have, even up till yesterday or even up till this Monday, had violent rioting and that sort of thing going on. So it's just crazy. It's impacting the people who live there and the people who are wanting to travel with safety, the people who want to live in a civil society. Dr. Vieira, our time is out. We would love to pursue this topic further. It seems like it's going to be, unfortunately, a very necessary topic for us to get into for the remainder of this year. You've talked about how this time has basically exposed the hand of those who are, in fact, not acting in the best interest of the people, we the people. And we just thank you so much for joining us again here. We'd like everyone, if you want to find out more of Dr. Vieira's work, go to News with Views, all one word, newswithviews.com. And where can they find your books, Dr. Vieira? Well, they're all on Amazon. Look me up, Edwin Vieira, and you'll find
half a dozen books. I think they'll all be in print still. And you can look me up on YouTube. There are a number of what I would call impromptu interviews that I've done.
Excellent. Well, we're grateful for your presence here every time. And folks, if you just go to our YouTube channel, Liberty and Finance, and also search for Vieira, Vieira, within that you will pull up the interviews we've done with Dr. Vieira. Dr. Vieira, thank you for joining us again this time.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Donegan.
If you've decided that now is the right time for you to protect your family's financial future by acquiring physical precious metals, gold and silver, I'm delighted to let you know that I have now become a licensed dealer's representative for Miles Franklin, one of the oldest and most trusted names in bullion dealerships. And we can provide you with physical delivery to your personal possession or to professional vault storage or precious metals IRAs. Just email me at libertyandfinance@protonmail.com, and please include your name and phone number in your email to libertyandfinance@protonmail.com. We'll get right back with you and find out how to best meet your needs so that you can either begin or increase your acquisition of physical precious metals now and protect your family's future starting today.